So, welcome to the second week of your coaches hangout for Take Flight, the running track. This week, we've got your coach, Sean Buzzard. He's going to go over a few topics with you, some coaching topics. So I am going to ask that you do stay on mute while he's going over his presentation. However, at the end, if you do have questions, you can totally feel free to unmute your mic, ask your question. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can always type it in the chat if you have any questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Coach Sean Buzzard.
Good morning. First of all, can you see me?
I cannot.
It's showing like the video is working, but I don't see myself either. Let me check something really quick. The old just go out and come back in worked. Just like it worked in the Air Force for comm stuff. Turn it off, turn it back on. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad the video and sound seems to be working now. Like Jennifer said, I do have a few topics. So just some basics that I wanted to go over today. I know last week, the majority of the time was taken up with our panel, which included Meb, and you guys had lots of questions for the panel. And really, we only had about 10 minutes at the end to go over some things, and it was mostly question and answer. So I just wanted to hit on some basic running mechanics, some being that for most of us, we're in the middle of the cold season, just some proper warm-ups and gear for running in cold temperatures, and then touch on some nutrition basics for running, and then basically again open things up for some questions. I'm gonna use a little cheat sheet that I pulled up. So two things. The first thing I want to talk about is, one of the things we really talked about last week was following the plan, making sure that you're just not out there going for that runner's high and getting out there and getting carried away one day and getting getting ahead of the schedule, getting some extra miles in. Because the one thing we don't want to do is, whether you're a new runner or someone that's been doing it for a while, is we don't want any overuse injuries. And I will speak, I currently have an issue. I'm nursing a little injury and I got it checked out this week. I felt something pop at a half marathon back in October, and I probably should have taken some more time off before, it wasn't I ran a 5K in November for Veterans Day, and it seemed to be okay then. So I just kept kind of pushing the issue. And right around Christmas time, I went on a run and seemed to agitate my knee a little bit. So I just this past week went and got it checked out. And it looks like I did have a partial tear of my meniscus on my left leg. And the doctor was like, your knee structurally looks pretty good. I would normally maybe just give you a cortisone shot and tell you to rest for a few more weeks. But he saw some abnormalities in the distal femur that he wanted just to really quickly have cleared up before he gave me any kind of injection or anything. So did the MRI, and I have a follow-up this week, so I'll know more. But my hope is then just that everything's good, give it some additional rest, and be back and ready to go for Taji, for my February events that I already have scheduled, and to be able to complete Taji 100. So, but that's a great, it happens to all runners at some point, that you just have some kind of a nagging injury. So to avoid those types of things, strictly follow that plan that Jennifer put together. Don't go above and beyond just because you have a day where, like, I feel great today. It says I'm only supposed to run, it says I'm supposed to run 3 miles, but I'm feeling great. The weather's good. Or I skipped a day this week and I'm going to jam 2 days into one day. Like that is, I think, the most common thing is where somebody, oh, I got so busy yesterday or the day before that I owe 9 miles, and that's just not how it works. You don't, if the plan for the day is to do 2 miles, you don't, do the 2 miles plus mileage from the other days. You just stick to the plan. If you miss a day, you know, sometimes that happens. Just get back on track that next day. So adhering to the plan, and it's a theme you're going to see again and again. Just kind of, you're also going to have those days where you get out running, or the weather. That's something I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. Is just if there's icy conditions or something that prohibits you from doing the prescribed mileage for the day or something like that. Again, that's going to happen. If you don't have access to a treadmill, sometimes you're just going to have to adjust the plan accordingly with the weather. So that just bringing up, so safety number one is always the top priority. And I, as a coach who coaches team sports, and working as a personal trainer, health coach, running coach, that is always the priority. The health and safety of the client or the athlete is always number one. So I'm going to segue kind of into running gear then, like how to warm up properly, how to dress for conditions. So obviously in the winter months, it's a little bit of a challenge. I'll speak to just like the current conditions here in Pittsburgh, PA. It's between 25 and 28 degrees, but there's a little bit of a wind chill in the mornings. So it's person by person. It's what you're conditioned for. But I was just listening to someone else talk about this. That person particularly was like, I'm good to go wearing shorts. Like I'm good with shorts, but I'm concerned about my extremities. So your fingers, toes. Obviously, you're wearing good footwear for your running shoes, and you can wear like an extra. Last week we talked a lot about compression socks, but so you're covered there pretty much on your socks. Some people will put on an extra layer of socks, but definitely like be concerned about your extremities as far as your fingers go. There are super expensive, great running gloves you can go out and spend money on, but I highly recommend the little stretchy dollar store gloves, because as many of you know, if you're an experienced runner, you've probably participated in races where you have to be at a starting line very early in the morning, and you're in some type of a chute, and you're dressed in all kinds of layers, and you're stuck, waiting for the race to start for about an hour or so, and it's very cold. But then as you begin your running, temperatures go up, then your body, as you begin to do your warm up and get into your race, you no longer need those things. So it's depending on the size of the race, things like that. Like a lot of times you end up like either discarding, or placing those gloves, or placing an outer layer somewhere. If it's a smaller race, it's easy to go back and get those things. But that's why I highly recommend like I said, a dollar store stretch gloves, because a lot of times you put those gloves down somewhere, take them off, or you'll see them as you're going through the course. People are just throwing little gloves aside. That way, if you have the cheap little dollar ones, or sometimes they even give them away at the exhibitions for the races, you don't necessarily have to worry about going back and getting them. But if we're talking about just training at your house or locally, take those gloves with you. Make sure that again, too, it's also based on the length of your run. If it's a shorter, if you look at your programming for the day, it's a shorter run. Maybe you don't need those gloves, but if you're putting in some miles, you're going to be out there for a while, you're going at a slower pace, you may want to make sure you have those with you. Yeah, and again, just going back to that, compare the temperatures and the conditions to your programming for the day. If you have a shorter run programmed, maybe you don't have to be so concerned with headgear covering your extremities. If it's a shorter workout, you can kind of gauge what you're doing as far as layering on that type of thing. And I touched on it briefly, but make sure you're covering your head. Again, if it's a longer run, a headband that covers the ears may suffice. There's plenty of different types of headgear. A baseball cap. There's running style baseball caps, but if it's colder, more extreme, you may want a thicker hat. And of course, the warm up is definitely important in the cold temperatures, but it's always, it doesn't really matter. It's important, equally as important in all weather, but you have to pay specific attention to it, like in colder climates, just because, or colder races, because you're going to get out there, and then the tendency is going to, because you're cold, is you're going to just kind of be still or huddled up. But as you get closer and closer to that, to the race or to your run, you're going to want to get your heart rate moving a little bit and get it to the level, warm up to the level of the programming. So, if that day is going to call for you to do some mileage, and I don't want to get deep into like heart rate zones today, because I want to tackle that next week with some specific things. We'll touch on it a few times today, the heart rate stuff. But if you're going to be kind of like mostly in that aerobic 1 or aerobic 2 zone of training, that's kind of where you want your warm up to be. And you don't need to get heavy sprints in to get warmed up if you're not going to be getting into the higher thresholds of the zones. But say you're there and you're going to do a 5K and you're set, your pace, the warm up should at some point get you near that pace and get your body prepared for those challenges. And then some other just mechanics things just to go into. I'm going to look at my notes here. Just running tall, making sure that you're paying attention to your stride, but make sure that you're staying tall throughout your runs. Your chest is open and your shoulders are back. One advance that is really talking about the strides. Yeah, Jen, I'm sorry, I'm seeing your notes now. Yeah, if you want to pull up those slides, that would be great. And then folks can follow along there. That would be good.
All right, you just tell me where you need me to be on these slides.
You know what? Go ahead and go to that second slide. There we go. Perfect. Yeah, just staying tall, and I already kind of mentioned those first three, actually all of them. But what I was getting ready to transition to is just stride length and opening up your stride. I know for me, it was a challenge. I think I mentioned last week, transitioning from kind of like a middle distance runner, which, more focused on 400 and 800 and more of a type of a sprint style stride, to an endurance runner, totally different. I was always taught, and they teach you this in level 1, is as a sprinter, or even if like in your closing distances of a race, where you're trying to pass some folks, your ground strokes, they compare it to spinning a basketball on your finger. If you have that basketball, the more taps you're getting, compare those to your ground strokes, like it's more about the speed. So I'm a short little, I'm 5'10", and when I sprint, it looks like Fred Flintstone. My feet are just, going really fast. But that is not, when you transition into mileage and getting into some bigger races, like obviously you're not looking for that short bursts of speed. You're looking for longer strides, trying to open that stride up. So what you're looking for is good heel strikes, and that running motion should have that follow foot kind of coming through at the knee level for each stride. But what I kind of really want to focus on is right now in today's day and age, like, you can go to any of these great stores that specialize in running shoes, and if you're having an issue with how your shoes are wearing, or if you're just having some little nagging injuries that, especially in their lower extremities, go to one of those stores and have them do a stride analysis on you, because they'll put you on a treadmill and kind of watch your stride and how they'll be looking for pronation, overpronation, how your feet are actually rotating, and they may be able to suggest some different shoes that might work better for you, just because, like, everyone is a little different, and coaching can have a coach work with you and try to correct some of the issues that you're having with your running stride. But for most of us, we're just going to get out there and go, and we're not going to really have that coach running with you or somebody observing specifically what you're doing. So you're just going to have to practice those mechanics, as far as like being tall, not hunching over, keep staying upright. But you are going to have, everyone's a little bit different in how their foot strike hits the ground, and so those things you can certainly consult the experts at those places, and see kind of what tips they have for you, what recommendations they have as far as footwear. And then, good, somebody just asked a question, so that's good. Stretching or no stretching? As a coach who's done tons of team sports stuff working with, we have shifted, I guess, in the last 20 to 30 years into like this mentality of giant formalized static stretching before everything, to more of a dynamic movement based stretching. So I do certainly think that there is a little bit of a place for some static stretching. I think, again, that becomes personal preference, and if you have like trouble areas. But for the most part, what I think, and for running, definitely, like I know for me, I have to kind of focus on stretching the calves a little bit before I get into some dynamic movement. But I think for the most part, your static stuff should be for afterwards, when you're trying to, like we talked about last week, about like getting that lactic acid stretched out, wringing out the wash rag, and before you get into some mobility and things like that. So again, great, probably 5-minute warm up would be, it's all depending on what you're going to get into that day. So again, match the programming, but if you're going for a 5K, and you get that last 5 minutes before the race begins, you are just stretching out any tight spots. Maybe that week you feel like your hamstrings were really tight, so finding a spot to do some leaning against the wall, stretching out those hamstrings. I know a big thing for our endurance runners at the track and field level is just getting some hip openers, swinging the legs out, and then just kind of like practicing those foot, getting a little bit of a 30 or 40 meter running back and forth, just run back and get the heart rate up, see how you feel. And then as far as like really in-depth static stretching, I would save that for after the run. Let's go ahead and click to that next slide, please. All right, so that first bit is just that, again, running tall, run natural, don't force movements. A big question that always comes up is the arms. What should I be doing with my arms? Once again, it's going to be individual preference. However, the general recommendation is just to not try and have tight hands, so not tight balled up fists, and not that like mechanical stiff robot arm that you see some people, a lot of times you see that with sprinters, they're, doing the karate chop, is to just have a relaxed hand motion, and to focus on keeping the arm swing, and not crossing over your body. You'll see that a lot too, is folks, crossing over with their arm swing. Just, you want a natural arm swing. You want it to be moving back and forth. Over exaggerate. Sometimes, again, with the sprints, you'll see some coming out of the blocks, like over exaggeration of the backward motion. But for endurance running, mainly you're going to see just a comfortable, natural forward arm motion, and just making sure you just keep it relaxed is number one thing. Because once you start getting into some higher distances, then you'll need to start, like, you'll see people hanging their shoulders, shaking it out, because there's a lot of arm swinging going on. Running terrain that challenges mechanics. This particular training session that I just went through for recertification, every so often throughout the programming, there was a one-on-one video of the coach. I think I have one of these slides with him at the end. And oddly enough, he mentions Meb in a few of his things. He was one of Meb's coaches, I guess, out in Colorado at for the national training. He mentions just when he gets asked what recommendations does he have for runners to be at their best. And that was his main thing, was just run all kinds of different, spend days doing some downhill work, spend days uphill, spend days on the trail. Don't always be on the road, don't always be on the track. You will work additional stabilizer muscles and train all kinds of different aspects of your conditioning by, getting on some inclines, whether that's uphill, downhill. Trails provide lots of challenges as far as tree roots, rocks, but at the same time, like I just said, you're going to improve your all the stabilizer muscles around your knees and ankles by being able to hit those non-flat areas and work through that. But at the same time, it's also something that you have to be very aware of, going back to the safety aspect. If you do not, and again, be careful, don't get outside the programming on that. Like, I'm not saying to, if the programming calls for a certain thing, like, oh, I'm going to go out and hit the trail today, even though it says I'm supposed to be on the track, that's just like good long-term programming should have you kind of crossing all those good things. Somebody's bringing up cross training. That's, obviously cross training there. We're talking about getting into like on our off days. I think that person probably talking about circuit training, cross training on our off days. Okay, I do see we only have 5 minutes left, so let's, instead of me hitting on those last couple things, I'll shift those last slides to next week, and then we'll just take some questions. I'll go up here and I'll read this. There's this one here from last week. Some cross training suggestions were elliptical, bike, or swimming. What about strength training? Should we have some strength? Should we have some strength training? How much or what type? You can absolutely incorporate strength training for sure. I think a great way is like to add suspension training. So like TRX trainers, if anyone's familiar with that, you can certainly do Olympic. The one thing I would just caution is to check with your, don't ever jump into anything like that without, consulting with a physician, just like this running program. All right. We talked about that last week. Know yourself, know your limitations, make sure that you've checked with a physician. And if you don't have any issues like specific with a knee or shoulder injuries, yeah, if you're comfortable with weight training and something you've done before, yeah, that can certainly be worked in for the off days. Um, let's see, you hit the stretching one, and then someone. So I don't know if the circuit training is a good cross training was an answer back to that, but yeah, there's ton of examples of what the cross training could look like. If you're a person who's not specifically into Olympic weightlifting, there are options as far as just like high intensity interval training, battle ropes, slam balls, medicine ball, that type, kind of like CrossFit style workout. But again, also make sure it kind of matches our programming. You don't want to, on a day where you're supposed to just be doing some light cross training, when you're building up to a long run, maybe, if you've got a big run in the programming the next day, you might not want to go extremely hard in the weight room. Any other questions? I think folks can unmute and ask a question, right, Jen?
Yeah, totally. And I just wanted to interject one thing, if you don't mind, Sean. I know a lot of you have signed up for more than one track on Take Flight. So if you signed up for functional fitness, that can totally count as your cross training day. So, and if you didn't sign up for functional fitness, it's not too late. You can go to the website, teamrwb.org/takeflight, and you can still sign up. And that way you can download that functional fitness plan. And, if you don't know what to do for your cross training, just pick a day on that and do it. It's got little to no equipment involved. It's mostly body weight exercises. So that's a good way to add that strength training in too. So we've got 1 minute left. Does anyone have any burning questions before we leave?
Thanks for that note there, Jeremy. I'm gonna check that out. I have not heard of that Unbreakable Runner, but I am definitely going to check it out. If you're really into like mobility and stretching and things like that, there's a great book called the Supple Leopard, and that's Kelly Starrett. He's big in the CrossFit world but it's all about different ways of stretching and mobility, and so that's a good recommendation as well. The one thing I have to mention is just a plug for Taji 100. Because I know we talked about that last week. If most of the plans are actually like 6-week plans, so they kind of extend 6 to 8 week plans. If anyone isn't signed up for or looking at Taji 100, it would be a great way to kind of continue out that plan and continue your motivation through February.
Sounds good. So it is 12 o'clock East Coast time. So thank you so much, Sean, for all of that information. And thank you all for joining us this week. So we will see you next Sunday at the same time for our third Coaches Hangout. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Have a good week.